So what's the best method to learn a foreign language? I got this comment from someone in one of my videos who said, I'm so confused because some people say I should just listen and read in the language for about 1,000 hours before I even start speaking. Other people say I should start speaking from day one, and I just don't really know what is the fastest way to learn a language. So I thought this is a really good question. And today I'm going to share with you a little bit of the science of why this is such a complex question to answer, why experts do not agree on what is the best method to learn a language, and most importantly, I'm going to share a few tips and a few questions that you should consider before you decide which is the method that is most likely to work for you. So if you want to find a method that is going to help you learn faster, I recommend that you watch until the end so that you don't miss those very important questions that you should consider when choosing your ideal method. Now you're probably wondering, who is this lady and why should I listen to her? My name is Esther. I am a doctor in language education. I have spent the past 25 years of my life learning languages. I've learned a total of 9 languages to different levels of proficiency. I even trained and worked as a translator and interpreter for several years. Then teaching languages. I was a teacher for more than 10 years. And then researching languages, and my specialization is on how the brain learns languages, so everything that has to do with the brain and language learning. I've spent years advising and working for institutions such as the University of Cambridge, the European Union, and the United Nations. And now I've made it my mission to help students just like you who are struggling to make progress or to learn a foreign language, to find the most effective ways to learn a language in a way that makes sense for their brains. Now, let's move to our main question for today. What is the best method to learn a language? Let me give you a little bit of the history on this because you are not the first people actually asking this question. Now, the question of what is the best method to learn a language has kept us very busy for the past few decades. And not only how to best learn a language, but how to best teach a language, because we think that, if we understand what's the best method to learn, then we can adapt the teaching, right? And I would say the first people that started thinking about this was in the mid-70s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And the main question they were asking is like, okay, why some students are really good at learning, why other students are really struggling? What is it that the good language learners are actually doing? What are the strategies that they are using? We really thought that if they're clearly getting better results, it must be because they are doing something differently. If we can unpack what they are doing, if we can clarify what their method is, then we just need to copy that method. We just need to copy those strategies, give them to people who are struggling, and surely they're going to have the same results. And that is really the theory behind all the methods that you may see out there. All the methods out there are in reality a collection of strategies that they've put together, and that they say if you follow these strategies in this specific order, you will get these kind of results. And actually something that I find very interesting is that if you go on YouTube and you put language learning strategies, there are a million videos of people giving strategies, probably including myself. And a lot of those strategies, actually, when you look at them, especially those videos that are like, 35 strategies to learn languages super fast, a lot of those strategies were already documented in the late 80s, and they are part of those inventories of strategies that a few very well-known researchers actually put together in what we call like inventories of strategies. So it's quite interesting that we are still resorting to those strategies because eventually, like, the ways we have to learn haven't changed so much. Although, of course, now with AI, that is changing really fast. So I am seeing much more creativity today than we've been able to have in the past 20, 30, 40 years. Now, let's go back to our method. So we were saying any method is just a collection of strategies. So you may be like, okay, right, but then let's just test the method, right? Let's test the method with all of those strategies inside. Now, the problem with that is that what we see when we do research is that methods are actually context dependent. So that means that a method that works for a certain person in a certain context with certain circumstances may not work for another person with different circumstances, different context. Now, that makes research really, really difficult, because eventually what we would like to do is to have very scientific studies where we can give the same method to people that are inherently the same in all possible aspects. Then we can give them one method, we can give them another method, and all things being equal, then the difference in the results, we would be able to say if it's due to one method or to another. Now, the problem is that people are much more complex than that, and that's where we are coming to now. And when we try to do those kind of studies, they actually fail from a methodological perspective. So this is the trick when people tell me, no, but there are a lot of studies that prove that, the natural approach, or like the comprehensible input, like a lot of you call it, it works really well. And it's like, yeah, but you need to read those studies, and you need to look at the methodology of those studies. And when I'm saying methodology, I mean the research methodology, because what we see is that if you're not comparing on equal circumstances, then the research is not comparable. So that is a huge problem we've got in research, and I don't think we have a way to get around it. Now, where research is moving towards, and it started moving in that direction in the first decade of the 2000s, it's that now we're not thinking just of the method. We've started realizing that for somebody to be able to learn a language is not just the individual strategies or even the set of strategies that they are using, if you want to call it a method, that it's making all the difference. That's only part of the difference, but there are a myriad of other factors that are having an impact on that person's results in the language. And again, what a lot of that research has led to, and I've spent years and years actually going through all of this research, and I did part of my thesis on this, so that's why I'm so familiar with it. It's that it's actually a constellation of factors. And I'm going to show you this slide now that I use in some of my courses and some of my programs. And it's just to show how many factors are actually involved in you learning a language. So if you look at this, you see yourself in the middle, that's you trying to learn a language. And then you've got all of these things kind of happening around you. You've got your age, you've got your personality, you've got your context, you've got the people around you, how they make you feel, what you believe about the language, your anxiety. And then if you realize the methods is just a tiny little thing within this whole myriad of factors that are having an impact. And this is why a lot of the research we have done in the past was inconclusive, because we basically were ignoring everything else that was happening around the student. And I'm sure you can agree with me, but doing any kind of research where you can control for so many factors, it's very, very, very impractical, because eventually what it comes down to is that we are all unique, and we all have a very unique set of circumstances and factors that are impacting our learning, and that we simply cannot replicate. We are not clones. Even if I find someone that has very similar levels of anxiety, and it's living in the same country, and is going to the same class with the same teacher, probably there are other things, maybe their age, maybe how they feel about the language, what they believe about the language learning process. There's so many factors that are going to be different that it's almost impossible to control for all of them, at least in the kind of scientific studies that I was referring to. Now, the next step is realizing that if we are all so unique, then the method that we are going to need, it's also going to be quite unique. It's going to have to be adapted not just to those strategies, but to everything else that is in that constellation of factors. And the first thing that you need to do is to be aware of those factors. And this is something that in most qualitative studies that we've done, so studies where we're not looking to confirm any hypotheses, we are not doing them across very large numbers of people, we are just doing them with a few individuals and researching very in depth each of them to try to understand these kind of relationships. And what we've discovered is that most of the very good learners that are very, very multilingual, they all are very aware of most of these factors and how these factors are actually affecting the learning. So this is super interesting. And back in the day, probably, I don't know, 10-15 years ago, I was doing research with actually some of the most multilingual people on earth who are interpreters at the European Parliament. And this was one of the things that came out from that research. I was doing very in-depth interviews with them and asking them, how do you learn additional languages? Bear in mind, some of these interpreters are working from 7 to 9 languages, so they don't have necessarily an active competence in all of them, but they are able to understand them sufficiently well for governments to trust that they are going to relay the message into one of their stronger languages correctly. And I can tell you the expectations from those type of language professionals are just so high that for me they are just incredible, and they're so humble and so nice. But I can tell you more about their research another day. But now, when I was researching those people, it was just confirming everything else we've seen in other research, is that very multilingual people who are very efficient language learners, they are very aware of everything that's happening in their brain, and they are very aware of all of those factors that are kind of hanging out around them and that they're impacting their learning. And they have all developed their own method, so a set of strategies perfectly adapted to how they learn and how they manage all of those factors so that they can learn faster. Because bear in mind, they're getting paid for learning faster. The faster they learn, the more languages they have, and then the more languages they have, the more work they get, and then the more they get paid. And I mean, there are different incentives within the system. And now, just to close off this part, I'm gonna show you this gift that I actually really like, because I feel like this is exactly what trying to learn a foreign language is like. And most of us don't realize it until somebody brings it to our attention. And hopefully that's what you're getting from this video. And now, whenever you are struggling to learn a language, you may start thinking about it in these terms, looking at this image and thinking, maybe there's one of those balls that I'm not actually thinking about it, and that is what keeps falling in my face. Because that is literally what I see happening, is that students focus on one thing or another, but they are forgetting kind of the bigger picture, because not many people actually talk about this. Why? I don't know. Maybe it's just not very interesting. Maybe people don't know about it, or maybe it's simply just not like a very sexy topic to speak about. Now, you might be thinking like, okay, Esther, so now I'm even more confused. I still don't know which method I should use, and I don't think I actually understand better how I should choose the right method for me, which is what I promised you at the beginning. So in this part of the video, I want to share with you what we know from research that has the highest impact on your ability to learn a language effectively and to get faster results. And what we know is that out of all of those factors, the most important ones are the ones that happen in your brain. And if you master what happens in your brain, everything else becomes easier. Planning becomes easier because you know how to manage your emotions and you know exactly what strategies you should use. Finding the right teacher becomes easier because you know what you're looking for, you know the teacher that you need, because you know how you learn. So it's easier to find someone that is going to match your needs. It's easier to find the right strategies because now you know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, and you can actually create tasks that are going to help you to leverage your strengths, but also tap on your weaknesses so that slowly you can retrain your brain to be able to do things that naturally it's not going to want to do because it's not its natural way of doing things. Now, within the things that happen in your brain, there are two big groups. The first one are your emotions, your anxiety, your motivation to learn the language, your beliefs about the language, how those beliefs are impacting your actions, your self-confidence, your identity, how you feel as part of a group or not. And all of that, being aware of it and being able to monitor how it's impacting your learning and to somehow control this impact, that's going to be very important in order for you to be able to, for example, set realistic goals, stick to your roadmap, keep working every day, even if you're not seeing results just yet, control your anxiety when you're trying to speak or when you're trying to listen and you don't understand everything and then the anxiety kicks in. Just being aware and able to control your emotions around language learning and all of the psychology of language learning is super, super important. And we know from research that students that control that are going to have better results, inevitably. The other part is what we've called the learning styles, and you're probably familiar with these like visual, auditory, and kinesthetic styles. Now, those have not actually been scientifically validated, so there's a lot of debate still going out around those. But what we do know from research in psychology and in neuroscience is that we do have cognitive profiles. Now, you may ask, what's a cognitive profile, Esther? Yeah, cognitive profile, it's basically like your brain's fingerprint. It's the way your brain is going to perceive new information, the way your brain is going to process this information, how it's going to store the information, and how it's going to retrieve the information when you need it. And there's a lot of research that has been done on this in psychology, but what I really like is when I look at the studies in neuroscience, because neuroscientists go as far as speaking about a neural fingerprint, which they say the way individual brains react to the same stimuli, to the same information, varies so much and paints such unique pictures when you see like the brains kind of lighting up, that you can actually talk about an individual fingerprint, that every single person's brain actually works in a different way. Now, of course, there are patterns that we observe, and that's how we end up grouping people and saying you're more like this for this and more like that for the other thing. But it's very, very interesting because I keep hearing videos online that say we all learn languages in the same way, all brains learn in the same way. And honestly, I don't know what more evidence we may need. If anyone is doubting what I'm saying, just Google cognitive profiles, neuroscience proof, and you're going to see there's like so many articles and so many papers, and you can just go and read them, and you're going to see that the results are actually very interesting and quite conclusive, because again, this isn't social research like I was saying with psychology and with all these other studies we've done in how you learn languages. Now we just see in the images of your brain how it lights up when we are giving it a full sentence in the foreign language. It's much easier to measure. And I'm going to give you many more details about some of these studies in one of my next videos. But what I want you to remember now and to walk away with from this video, it's that how your brain reacts to emotions and to new information, it's eventually what is going to determine the method that it's most likely to work for you. And this is a topic that I'm so passionate about that I've literally spent the past few years researching it and trying to figure out if there is a way for me to measure how my students learn, what is their cognitive profile, so that I can basically create a method that is perfectly adapted to how they learn and it's going to help them get the fastest possible results. And eventually I developed a tool that I have been using with my private one-on-one clients for the past year and a half. And it's been having amazing results because it allows me to tell the teachers how exactly they should structure each session, each task, every explanation, so that each individual student is going to make the most sense of it and it's going to take the most out of it and it's going to learn the fastest. Now, I'm finally going to give access to the wider public to this tool because I feel it's so powerful and it has helped so many of my clients get much faster results than they were getting before, and some of them were trying for like 30 years to learn a language. So when we start adapting everything to their brain and they get results in 6 months, then you do realize how powerful this is. So depending on when you're watching this, there's going to be probably a link in the description that you can either sign up for one of the live sessions, otherwise it would be like a waiting list link or something that you can join if you are interested, because my goal is to make this tool available so as many people as possible can benefit from it. But if you do not want to sign up for my diagnostic, and that's perfectly fine, I'm going to give you at least 3 questions that I recommend you ask yourself, because these questions are going to be very helpful for you to start reflecting on whether the way you used to learn it's the best way for your brain, or whether you're just going for what feels easiest and not necessarily doing what you should be doing, which is pushing your limits a bit towards what you're not comfortable with. When you're answering these questions, think about previous learning experiences. It could be languages or anything else. It could be how you learn to play an instrument, how you learn to drive, how you learn to play a certain sport, anything that requires a certain complexity and that it's considered a skill. Now, the first question I would ask you to think about is about instructions. Do you usually prefer people to give you very clear instructions and very clear rules that you can follow up front? Or do you prefer just going there, exploring, trying to find out what's going on, and trying to deduce the rules yourself? So that's the first question that I would ask, and I think it's a very important one, because if you really like having very clear structured instructions, you're probably going to need to do that for language learning as well. While if you're more on the exploratory side of things, then you're probably going to be better with tasks that are of more exploratory nature, right? That you just like, you can read and then absorb from the text. But again, there are quite a lot of things that you measure in the test, and eventually the method you need is going to be a combination of your answers to all of those questions. So it's a bit difficult to say do this or that, but I think this will be already very helpful. And then the second question I would ask you, and I think this is really, really important in languages, it's about details. Like, are you more the kind of person that sees the forest? Or are you the kind of person that doesn't see the forest and just focuses on the little leaves in every single little tree? Because this will actually help us understand if you are the kind of person that it's going to get fixated in very tiny details, and that may be a block, but on the other hand, that may be an advantage, because a lot of the things that happen in the languages are in little details, like little letters we add at the end of a word, or at the beginning of a word, or at the end of the sentence. So on the contrary, if you have more of this globalist approach, it means that you are going to be much more drawn to ignoring all of those details and just concentrated on the overall message. But then you're probably missing things that are happening in those details. And very often, being able to focus your attention strategically to those details, it's going to make the difference between you being stuck at an intermediate level or being able to really develop true fluency and proficiency in the language and progressing towards more advanced levels. And then the third question I would ask you is whether you tend to see things that you have to learn as little Lego blocks that you have to try to make sense of them and build things with them, or if you are more of the kind of immersive learning type that doesn't care about the blocks. They just kind of try to absorb as they go, and they just learn kind of chunks, but they don't necessarily think like, how would this be different if it was plural instead of singular, if it was feminine instead of masculine? And again, depending how you answer those questions, we're gonna need different strategies, right? Because it's not the same somebody that just absorbs things than somebody that needs to play with them in order to learn. What I want you to understand after watching this video is that there is not a single method that it's going to work for everybody. You shouldn't be looking for that silver bullet that it's going to just magically resolve your problem. It's very likely that you're going to have to build your own method based on all of these factors, how you feel about them, putting everything together, all the strategies, and then creating something that really works for you, and something that you will iterate and that you will keep improving until it becomes like a very effective approach that works really, really well for you. It may probably not work for your friends, it will not work for your neighbors, but it will work for you, and that's what you want, really, right? Like, you just want to find the way for you to learn a language. So now I hope you have a bit of a clear understanding of why there is not a perfect method, and also a few ideas of what you can do if you want to find the method that will really, really work for you. Remember, there's a lot of test and trial involved in this, so I would just say pick a number of strategies that initially seem like they're gonna work for you. Then you're already 80% there, you test them, and then after a few weeks, you adapt again. And that's how you will eventually find the method that works for you, in the same way that those European Parliament interpreters I was telling you about are able to develop their own very precise method that works really, really well for them. And if you're curious about how the brain learns languages, you might just be interested in checking out this video next, because it may just be the extra piece that you're missing in your puzzle in order to create your own personalized and super efficient language learning method.